You are listening to the Get Global podcast, a weekly journey into the international business landscape with leaders, knowers, and doers from around the world who share their stories and insights on the issues that matter most. Get Global brings you the best to help you thrive in foreign markets. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Get Global podcast. I'm Julian Luthold, CEO and founder of Get Global, and we have a wonderful panel today. Some guests coming to us from Malaysia, where there has been a stunning election just 1 month ago, and now people are making sense of it. The fast takes are in, and real analysis has begun. The election of Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamed, who at 92 has returned to power after campaigning against the party that he helped form, the United Malays National Organization. It was a stunning election because nearly every piece of analysis that I had read focused on his predecessor and recently ousted leader, Prime Minister Najib Razak, winning that election, in some cases, 75% likelihood or above. So everyone was surprised, or nearly everyone, it seems. And today we're getting into the details of that and what it means for business and what it means for trade and linkages within the ASEAN region. So we have as our guests Rebecca Fatima Sta Maria, who is a senior advisor at Zico Advisory. She has a very distinguished career with the Malaysian government spanning more than 30 years and many roles focused on trade and industry. She provided oversight for the formulation and implementation of Malaysia's international trade policies and positions as the Secretary General in Malaysia's Ministry of International Trade and Industry. This had involvement with many trade agreements and activities, including TPP, ASEAN, APEC, and OIC, and as well as multilateral fora like the World Trade Organization. She was the ASEAN chair for the ASEAN-India Trade and Goods Agreement, and the chief negotiator for the bilateral free trade agreements with India and Turkey. She also provided oversight for the TPP negotiations and other bilateral and regional FTAs. She is extraordinarily experienced and she was in the Najib Razak government as well as the Mahathir Mohamed government directly preceding that. So we are seeing it from both sides of the political divide from her perspective. Also joining us today is Stuart Dean, who was one of our distinguished speakers in the first year of Get Global. He, until very recently, was the country chief or the regional chief executive officer for General Electric, and had been in the region since the early 90s. He is deeply familiar with ASEAN and Malaysia in particular, and is a prominent corporate leader. He is also with Zico Advisory at the moment, and speaks on a wide variety of topics related to ASEAN and business in the region, both in the region and outside of it. And we're just tremendously excited to have such experienced people guiding our thinking today. So thank you both for joining us. Hi, Stu. Howdy. Great to see you too. This is a rarity on the Get Global podcast that we get to turn on the cameras. Usually it's cameras off, but now we're cameras on. And Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us too. So it's been 1 month since Malaysia has demonstrated democracy at its best, and that is the peaceful overhaul of government and transfer of power. The new government has been busy, to say the least. What do you think of the election? What do you think of the election results in particular right now?
You're asking, can I go first too?
Please.
Yeah, we were very happy with the outcome. For me, personally, at a very personal level, I thought it was we needed change. After 60 years of the same government, we needed to have things move. There's so much happening in the world, and we cannot have same old, same old. And there were a lot of issues around that administration. For me, it was mainly issues of governance and the arrogance around that. And I just felt very strongly we needed change.
I certainly echo that. There's never been a change in government in Malaysia since independence. So for 60 years, Farizan has run the country, and I think change is a necessity in this world. I can't say I predicted the outcome of the election. Not too many people I know did predict that, but I did have friends who were very passionate about getting a change in Malaysia. They tend to be younger, more progressive people that are supporting the change that is happening now. I think the biggest thing for me was the increasing corruption during the Najib government. And I think that really turned a lot of people off and moved the election towards to the Mahathir party.
Why do you feel that it was such an election upset?
Here's the thing. Some of us, I think it was almost a perfect storm. There were a number of missteps by the previous administration. And then you also had the personality of Tun Mahathir coming in and pulling the disparate opposition groups together. We've never been able to really get them this close. And we also had social media. Overwhelmingly, social media played a role. And I think folks underestimated the power of social media. So, and if you compare the two parties, the way they went at these elections, the campaigning, one had a lot of money, so they were throwing a lot of money around. The other didn't have that much money, but they were so savvy with social media, and they got their message across. And a lot of us, that resonated with a lot of us, especially the young and the new voters. They tried. I must say that the previous administration tried. Some of them, they started this whole movement called #Undi Rosak. Based on some analysis, they arrived at the conclusion that the swing comes from people who don't vote or who spoil their vote. So Undi Rosak means spoil your vote. So they started this Undi Rosak movement, #Undi Rosak, hoping to get more people not to come back to vote, or to just, if you're voting, you spoil your vote. And when they made a number of missteps, I think one of the earlier missteps was having the elections on a Wednesday. We've not had elections on a midweek. I think the last was something like 1950s or something like that. So that got a lot of people upset. They said, "Why are you doing this? Is there an ulterior motive?" So at that point, Undi Rosak, sort of the #Undi Rosak, disappeared, and what surfaced was #Pulang Undi. That means go back to vote. And there was a lot of crowdfunding to get people to go back to vote. I mean, it was amazing what happened. We have this civil society group for fair and clean elections called Bersih, and Bersih mobilized folks across the globe to assist Malaysians who are living overseas to send in their votes. I mean, it was an amazing, people movement without violence, and I think that was really to the credit of Malaysians, actually. Yeah.
It's just makes the point that having at least somewhat fair elections really can make a difference in governance and improving governance over time. So I think it's great. I think it's certainly Prime Minister Mahathir's presence as leading of the government, I think, has made everybody feel confident about the change. He is the most respected leader in Malaysia, and so leading the opposition and now leading the government, I think, makes people feel very comfortable.
So at the age of 92, he's sort of an unconventional choice. I think that it's obvious that there's a lot of brand familiarity with him. People know what they're getting. What do you see as the future as, Najib Razak, he was in power for 10 years. Mahathir Mohamed was in power for a very long time before that. How do you feel that this will be explained or has been explained to the public, and what kind of expectations long-term can, companies and foreign observers expect in the new government?
Okay, here's from my conversations with people in the business community rather. What really strikes a chord with them is the pledge of this government to enhance governance, transparency, rule of law. That is for the business community. For the average Malaysian, it's addressing the cost of living issues, bread and butter issues. So what you will have, I think, more of going forward, and the immediate initiative is to address cost of living, and that's what they did with the GST, for better or worse, and addressing the issues around governance. So you've got the finance minister going through all the files, and so you get a story a day, an unfolding a day. And some people get a bit uncomfortable. They say, what are you trying to do? Washing dirty linen in public, it's not good for the market. You're going to spook the market. But at the end of the day, it's also gives us an impression of the enormity of the task ahead for this new government. What we thought was just one item or two of major governance, breaches is turning out to be quite a bit. So it gives the Malaysians also some idea of what can happen when you when you don't pay enough attention to what's going on in government. And when government behaves in this arrogant, I know everything manner, the kind of abuses that can take place. So that is what's coming through now. And I think Malaysians accept it, and they know that this government has a lot to do, and the first things first, clean up the place, clean up house. And they're doing it. The fact that while, it's 4 different opposition parties, to bring them together, it's not an easy task, right? Different ideologies, etc. So while Mahathir is trying to sort that out, he's also got what we call the Jedi Council, the Council of Elders, working to sort out different parts of government, cleaning up different parts of government at a very technical level, administrative level. You've got another group looking at institutional reform. So a lot of things are happening simultaneously. And because Mahathir is almost like a man in a hurry, he knows he's got a finite time. So he's working to get as much done during this, what he says, 2 years, as much done as possible. I worked in that Mahathir administration. It was a really ambitious, hardworking, pushing us. The first thing he did when he became Prime Minister was to change the work ethic. We all had to clock in, like, industrial workers. We had to clock in. We had name tags. All these things. He immediate symbolic changes you had, and then that sort of changes your mindset as well, to say, excuse me, that this is a different administration. So, and in this time around, he's doing similar things. He's moving it so fast. People are saying, oops, yep, not business as usual, folks, But having said that, in the 20 years, and that's why I believe you cannot have a leader who stays in power for too long, Stu. In the 20 years that he was in power, he did a lot of good for this country. He also affected a lot of institutions. Some of the problems that we have today is exactly because of what he did. He, first things first, the education system. Today he wants to fix it, right? The whole thing started when he was Minister of Education. This was in 1974. So he changed the education system. So now we are reaping the fruits for whatever of that change. Then as he became in his term as prime minister, the judiciary was affected, civil service, institution after institution was affected, and that's what's happened today. So now in this 2 years that he's in, back in power, he has promised to fix institutions, and to his credit, he's got right people. He didn't really bring in cronies, as one would have thought. He brought in really good people. The appointment of the new Attorney General is excellent. Tommy Thomas is an outstanding lawyer. He's got a fantastic mind. He does legal history on the side. He writes prolifically. I mean, he's the right choice for Attorney General. So in this time around, Mahathir's done some really good stuff. So righting all the wrongs that he did. Yep. Stu?
Yeah, I would say, Tajri, you mentioned the corruption concerns, particularly in the corporate sector. Certainly, all of the American companies that do business in Malaysia have had major concerns about that. I went back and looked at the Transparency International rankings from 2012 to 2017. Over those 5 years, Malaysia's dropped 8 places in the rankings. So, it's not just perception; it's reality. And I think the new government has got a great opportunity to change the culture, and I'm sure that some of the Najib-related entities will probably lose a lot of projects, and many projects are already being canceled or slowed down. So I think that's going to be very positive. And one of the things I always think is interesting, that one example of how bad it had gotten, they've gotten 350 containers of cash, handbags, and jewelry from the Najib family. It's unbelievable.
The stories coming out are astonishing. Yes, I think that there's a little bit of feedback on that side, but sounds like it's all good now. But the stories coming out seem astonishing, and it sounds, Rebecca, like you're thinking that it's going to be a steady drip of more stories like that. And it's also coming out sort of the relationship that he had with the Najib Razak, that is, the relationship that he had with the media, how pervasive his influence was on that, and how that was probably instrumental in creating perception.
Sorry, Julian, can I say that when Najib when he took over in 2009, we were all very supportive, because he said all the right things. He wanted to change. He wanted to bring reform and transformation into the country. He got us together to relook the economic structure, and he got good people around the table to have the new economic model. It was really a time when we were all full of optimism. But after the work was done, it didn't get implemented. Because there were vested interest groups who didn't actually like what was going on, the changes that were being proposed. They wanted status quo. So they then, little by little, the new economic model got whittled down and not implemented. It got morphed into the economic transformation program, which was just programs, quick, quick deliverables, fix this, fix that. Nothing, in terms of serious policy changes when it came to governance and transparency, rule of law. And over the course of that 10 years, very draconian laws were put in place. One of the first things he promised was to take away the Internal Security Act, which was detention without trial for 2 weeks or something like that. So we were very happy. He says, "Oh, okay, he's done it." Then he introduces a law which is even more draconian than that one. So, and over the 10 years, we've had a series of laws and regulations that took away basic freedoms of the people. And that was one of the things that got to them. And the final straw, I think, was the anti-fake news bill, which was pushed through Parliament, the last days of Parliament, pushed through with very minimum consultation. Pushed through Parliament so quickly. What
was the upshot of that bill, would you say?
It was passed.
But what was that bill? Why is it a bad thing?
It's anti-fake news. So anything that you say which is anti-government is fake. And it was very broad, very wide, very vague, and you don't know who's to determine what fake news is. So there were a lot of questions around that, and that really got to people finally. So one of the things that this government has said, and I trust Tommy will do it, is to quickly review all the laws. And Ambiga and her team, Casey Vora, that's looking at institutional reform. They're also looking at these laws that need to be repealed or reviewed. And they've promised that this will be done. Some laws will be repealed when Parliament sits on the 16th of July. And I think the fake news bill is the first one to be on the chopping block. Mm. So this is really good news for all of us. People, if you walk around Kuala Lumpur, you can see the joy in people's faces. They feel so light and free, and that's something we haven't seen in a long time.
Wow. Now, if I may go back just a little bit to something that you said a moment ago, if the status quo that had been established before Najib Razak was established under Mahathir Mohamed, and the veto players that were sort of entrenched in that moment basically exerted themselves and stopped the key initiatives that Najib Razak was trying to put into place. What's different about today, and how is that likely to be felt by both common citizens and the business community?
Okay, here's what's different today. Today you have social media, which will and the people realize the power that they have. Mm. So let me just give you an example. When Mahathir decided, when he formed the early part of the early days, he formed the cabinet. He assigned himself the role of education minister. I thought it was a good thing. You destroy the institution, you fix it. But social media, they said, excuse me, in your manifesto, you said Prime Minister can only hold one portfolio, which is Prime Minister. And he cannot be another minister, whether it's finance minister or whatever. So they called him up. They really, there was so much traffic on social media. He backed down, and he appointed another person as Minister of Education. So, and that also gave people the impression, oops, yeah, we can be the oversight for this body, for this government, and that's a good thing. The transparency, you're getting more engagement with people. I think that's the key for this, and this is different from the previous two administrations, Prime Minister Mahathir before and Najib. Now you've got people who actually provide oversight, which never happened before.
Stu, what do you think from the business perspective, and particularly from the foreign business point of view? What do you think the difference in terms of just experience, the feeling of doing business, whether it's more difficult or easier, or likely to be more profitable, beneficial to the economy? What are you expecting to see in the business environment, and what's it coming from? What has it been like for the last, 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, well, I talked about the corruption. I'd say, the multinational companies that do business in Malaysia have lost market share, particularly to the Chinese, who have won some of the big mega projects under the Najib regime, and we know that there's a lot of companies, really cronies to Najib and the previous government, that were winning most of the projects. And then, of course, particularly American companies are held to the FCPA requirements, and so it's you can't play that game like the Chinese do. Yep. So I think we're very optimistic about the environment becoming more transparent and creating more opportunities for professional multinational companies doing business in Malaysia. With that said, I think that obviously is a big change. There's a lot on the plate of the new government. It's going to take some time for them to figure out what their economic policies are going to be. But I think Prime Minister Mahathir is heading to Japan, flying over China, which kind of is a very symbolic move. So I'm optimistic in the medium and long term for sure. Short term, I think there's not going to be a lot of economic activity. I think I mentioned that some of the projects are either going to be shut down or slowed down. And I think it's going to take time. There's obviously a big fiscal deficit issue that needs to be confronted. And so, it's not going to be, a party right away. But I think long term, it's going to be very good for Malaysia and for every company that wants to do business here.
From your point of view, would you say that if Brand America is up or down or undisturbed or there's no difference? You mentioned that the Chinese had been getting a lot of play in the Najib administration. Has the playing field, do you expect that to be leveled out? It sounds like you are saying that, but does that mean that there's also a perception with perhaps Brand America? Was there something underpinning that that Chinese influence, or was it simply transactions at the top level?
Yeah, well, I think that mostly explains it, and then of course, American companies, very difficult to compete in an environment where corruption is rampant. There, that'd be my view.
Yeah. I agree that was one of the issues that companies faced. There was no level playing field, no open tenders, direct negotiations, all the major projects. There was no transparency at all. We don't know. We had no clue. Even I was in government. I had no clue how the awards were given. So in that context, now that they're relooking these projects and looking at how they were awarded and whether or not it was priced correctly, so those things, I think it's really good for the country. It sets the right tone. Now, I just want to come back to the fact that Prime Minister Mahathir is heading to Japan next week. All these years, Mahathir was a key in the Nikkei conference. And I don't think he's ever missed one of the sessions. So his going there is not news. But going there in a different capacity is news. And because this year's theme is the future of Asia, I'm very curious. I'm going to watch very closely to what he has to say. I've given some feedback to some friends who are in government on what I see as the sphere of Asia, Malaysia's role in ASEAN, that and juxtaposing that with the Belt and Road Initiative on one side and the Indo-Pacific, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy on the other. You've got these three and then ASEAN in the middle. So that it's very interesting to watch this dynamic and how it will unfold and what will come through in Mahathir's speech, because that's where, he hasn't made any foreign policy speech to date. So this would be an opportunity for us to really, unfortunately he's doing it at Nikkei, never mind, to hear what his ideas are. The old Mahathir had some real issues with Australia, US, and Singapore. He was very pro-Japan. I'm and he was also the champion of the South. He's the South Center that's based in Geneva is really one of his babies, one of his brainchild. So I'm looking forward to hearing his speech. He's giving the keynote.
So, if you don't mind me asking, what was the advice and your comments to your friends in the government? If you don't mind me peeking over your shoulder to see your notes.
We need to relook Malaysia's role. Malaysia has, in the past, in the early days of ASEAN, we were key players. Over the years, we were less, and we didn't play as much of a central role. And it's time for us to take on that role. When Mahathir was in power, he called himself an ASEANist. And he was responsible for bringing in Myanmar into ASEAN because he said it's easier to get reform in than outside. It's like it's better to be inside in the tent pissing in than pissing out than outside the tent pissing in, that kind of thing. So that was one of the reasons he brought Myanmar in. And I think he was also, during his time, he was very outspoken about issues in ASEAN. Over the years, we have at the highest level. Although at the officials level you can try, but you still need a lot of political will to move some of the things in ASEAN. And I think we can reclaim that, and we need to do that. That's one. The other is APEC. Malaysia will chair APEC in 2020. So we have to start preparing the ground now for what do we want come 2020. The BOGO goals are supposed to be completed by 2020. So when we take over, what is it? What's on the plate? So that's what I'm saying. Malaysia, whether it's civil servants, whether it's the leaders, we need to think of how we want to place Malaysia in this regional context.
What do you think would be likely, especially given RCEP, the Chinese Free Large Trade Area, and CPTPP, especially given Mahathir's very specific views on Global South?
Okay, for the CPTPP, my advice was please go ahead and do it, ratify it, because if the manifesto of this government says transparency, governance, predictability, rule of law, then CPTPP is it. Mm-hmm. And all the concerns, some of the concerns that the folks had, this group had of the CPTPP have been suspended. So I think they need to sit and have a good look at what we committed under the CPTPP, and I don't think we did a bad deal. We all, like I said, the principles of governance, rule of law, transparency, they're all embedded in this new agreement. So we should go ahead and do that. Now on RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that is ASEAN. That is an ASEAN baby, ASEAN driven. Now the issue with RCEP is, though it's an ASEAN-driven initiative, it's because China and India are in there, and China being China, it is seen as a China-driven. But if you're in the negotiating room, it's not China-driven. China waits and sees. It doesn't push, and I think that's typically the Chinese way. We don't push. We work behind the scenes. And so ASEAN's role in this agreement is so important. And I've said it many times. The failure of RCEP would be the failure of ASEAN, ASEAN centrality. And so ASEAN needs to get its act together. It needs to go out there and push for this agreement. Indonesia is a coordinating country. So, we've said that Indonesia needs to do more. That's how ASEAN works. For each agreement, there is one coordinating country. So in the case of India, for example, Malaysia was the coordinating country. So we had to push with India. Now in RCEP, it's Indonesia. So the Indonesian minister needs to really be on the ground, going from and pushing an ASEAN agenda.
So I'm keeping a view of the clock and what I promised all of you. So I'll want to ask some pretty fast questions here. Given this complex web of agreements that sort of characterizes Southeast Asia and its relationship and relationships amongst itself and with its neighbors, what do you think this means for the United States later on? perhaps to rejoin the TPP or involvement in the region at a commercial diplomatic level, right? So trade agreements, economic activity, things like that. Does this environment with the new administration in it lend itself well, or are we sort of in a more difficult situation than we might have been, say, 4 years ago?
Stu?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just read something from one of Mahathir's speeches. FDI means bringing capital and technology and setting up plants in Malaysia and upskilling the local workforce to make products and services for both Malaysia and the world, which I think is a great fit for the Malaysia strategy. He does not want a trade war, but he also won't want to be pushed around by any other governments, including the U.S. government. And he wants to have a business-friendly environment, which I think is good for all the companies that are interested in doing business in Malaysia.
Yeah, if you look at his track record when he was prime minister, he was pretty much business friendly. We had investments coming in from, I think, the peak of investments, foreign investments in Malaysia. So I think it's the U.S. businesses will find a friendlier business environment here, and the issue here is really what will come out of the leadership in the U.S. There is no clarity. I've been trying to get an understanding of U.S. position vis-a-vis ASEAN. We're not getting that. But we're also hearing the Indo-Pacific strategy that I think has been articulated a few times by the Americans. But there is no meat to that.
Sounds like it's still in consultation. And formulation.
So there's still some haziness when it comes to the U.S. role, whether it's in ASEAN, whether it's in the East Asia Summit, whether it's in APEC. It's not coming out very clearly. You used to be very clear leaders. I remember APEC meetings, the Americans would be right there pushing the agenda. The last year or so, quiet.
Stu, looking at sort of who the losers in the new landscape are going to be. If you're a company trying to figure out who do you partner with, what do you do in Malaysia, what would be the characteristics of the kinds of collaborators that probably would not be the right ones to suit up with?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of companies that were very closely connected to the Najib administration. And I think they're likely to be some big losers over the next 5 years. Would be my guess. Some are very competent companies, but I think they're going to have to pay the price for cooperating with the Najib administration and doing contracts that were not really competitively tendered. So those are the people that are going to be hurt. I think the companies that have remained independent and not political, those are ones that will continue to do well and in fact prosper going forward.
If you could guess, Stu, how many? What percentage of the real players out there would be the ones who kept out of politics?
I'd say media companies. I think they're in a very good position now. There are some large companies that I think have remained independent as much as they could, and they'll be viable going forward. I don't know, Tantri, you probably have a better idea than I do.
Yeah, the first thing, the moment the results were in and when the market was open, you saw the immediate impact of companies that were too closely linked to the past administration. The shares just fell. I think more important are the lessons that we all learn from this, that companies can learn from this, that you really be professional, do your job, do not expect contracts because of affiliation. I think that's a clear message that if you don't learn your lessons now and you start behaving, now try and align yourself with this new administration, I think it would be a mistake. We would not have grown and learned from the past few years.
And who do you think would be the winners? Are there clear winners that were perhaps, maybe not so great in the last administration because they didn't play ball, and now this is their moment because they stayed clean? Like, who's out there that just was really winning it?
I think there are companies. I mean, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to name them, but these are companies that stayed out of the fray, who went at it and did their own, and worked and did their business, regardless of the political affiliations. If they didn't make it public. There are some really good oil and gas companies out there who stayed out of the fray. Let me just say that towards the later part of the elections, before the elections, companies were actually told to come up with pro-government videos and stuff like that. There were some did.
And now they regret it. Yeah, we heard some comments from them.
And including multinationals in Malaysia were pressured to support the.
Many of them, in fact, quite a number of them, did not do it. Some just said, "Okay, I won't be in the country." Those who were close to us, we advised them to leave the country. They go away and say, "Oh, I don't have time because I'm traveling. I got business meetings overseas, so I can't do it." And that's good. You come back to vote, and that was the most unethical thing, I thought, to force companies to do it. And I think that those are also lessons that companies will learn going forward. You don't do this sort of thing. You stick to your business.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're almost at the end, but I just wanted to get one more in from both of you. What do you see as the next priorities? What are you expecting to see? And what would you... So we'll stop there. I'll ask that one, and there's one more after that, sort of related.
Well, I'm happy if they're going on this track of, if they keep to their word of governance, integrity, rule of law. I'm happy with that.
Stu?
I'd be very happy with that. I think they're beginning to fill positions, but at this moment, there's as many people coming out of the administration as going in. So I think it's going to take some time for things to stabilize. And so I think investors need to be patient. Yeah. But I think, give them 6 months to get things settled. And, and I think we're going to be back on track. And, I'm totally confident Malaysia is going to be, one of the best places in ASEAN to do business, as it has been.
Yeah, I think the issue is Malaysians tend to be impatient as well, and and very critical of ourselves. So we're already starting to criticize the cabinet. I said, "Excuse me, is this any different from the previous one? If the previous one was so great, and you all are saying, oh, they got the act together very fast, how come we're in this mess? So let's give folks a chance. Yep. It is not easy. Like I said, there are 4 disparate political parties that have come together to form a government. And so I'm sure there's a lot of horse trading going on for the ministerial posts. So we just need to be a bit more patient.
Yeah, and it's the first government change in 60 years.
That was actually my second question, was like, how long do you expect this all to shake out? Like, what will be the signal that we're pretty much in a pattern?
Yeah, I think they should get their cabinet in place in the next couple of days or by next week. But I hope before he leaves for Japan. But otherwise, before the Ramadan period ends, one would hope that with the start of Shawwal, the new month, on the 15th of July, we will also have the start symbolically of a full government.
Great.
And Stu, you said 6 months?
I think it'll take 6 months, to get policies out and get government working.
Yeah.
I just think it takes a long time. And, and I'm sure they're going to get the best talent. And I nominate Tan Sri to go back to government. So.
Yeah, we're all too happy where we are being, armchair critics. Yeah.
That was kind of in the back of my mind. Maybe at some point then, before the next 6 months, I'll be writing an official invitation letter to Rebecca to come and speak at Get Global in our plenaries.
Yes, please do that. She'd be great.
Well, maybe we'll be seeing you both. Let me turn off these mics now and we'll discuss matters. But in the meantime, thank you both so much for joining us. This was really wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Julian.
Thank you, Julian.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to find out more about our events and get more global intel every week, sign up for our newsletter at getglobal.co.